Dan Orlovsky on the matchup between the Bills and the Texans. The prescription is go ahead and take your deep shots. We'll talk about that and some other issues, of course, facing the Bills. This matchup, the game they just had against the Bucs. Joe Marino of the Locked On Bills podcast joins us on the Wester Hotline. Joe, happy Wednesday. Happy day before the game. Short week, but we'll make do. Good to have you on today.
It's good to be on with you. These Thursday games, they come quick. I know it's a short week for the players and coaches, but for us people that cover the team, it comes quick too.
It does indeed. It does. Let's look back at the Tampa game for a couple minutes and then on to this matchup. We had a caller earlier ask a burning question about the run defense. I know the offense is like the story of the day, but it's a day where Tampa runs all over the Bills, and for anybody that's worried about them, I think run defense would be at the top of the list of things that they have to find a way to fix. So when you watch this team play throughout the season, they've given up massive rushing performances to guys that we do know and guys that we don't know. What is the common thread that has led to the breakdowns in the Bills stopping the run?
Yeah, I think a lot of times, Jeremy, it's just that they're not very consistent with their run fits, and you get some displacement in defensive linemen, defensive tackles in particular, getting moved out of their gap. And, when you're a single gap defense, someone's out of their gap, you got a problem. You get creased, and, if your second and third levels aren't sound, you're going to get long runs. And I think generally that's probably the biggest issue. Against Tampa in particular, I thought it was less that and more just getting out-gapped and getting out-leveraged in the run game, where Tampa did a really good job of using motion and using pullers. And usually those would be conflicting ideas where they would motion one way at the snap and then pull offensive linemen the other way. And whenever the motion happens, the Bills like to bump their backers and move them over a gap or a half a gap. And that's exactly what the Bucs wanted them to do. And so you get these linebackers going the wrong way with pullers coming the other way, and you got out-gapped multiple times, which was kind of a theme from the Dolphins game, where I thought that was probably more of a blend of, hey, people getting moved out of the way and getting out-gapped. But Tampa definitely did a good job of kind of using some of the Bills' rules against them and creating some really nice runways for Sean Tucker, who's got a lot of speed. So I think it was more scheme this time than it was just people getting rooted out of their gaps.
Do you feel like in some games it's scheme, in some games it's talent, and basically the Bills will have to try to find a way to cobble it together one way or the other each and every week?
Yeah, I'd say more times than not it's defensive linemen getting moved out of gaps. I would say mostly it's that, but now there's this motion layer to it the last couple of weeks that is kind of complicating some things. And I do think they have to overcome it with scheme. And here's the challenge with overcoming it with scheme. If you're wrong, boy, it becomes very problematic. And the Bills had a couple of situations against Tampa where they would run blitz or they'd overload to a side. And then, Tampa would check at the line and go to a weak side run or, flip the direction of the run. That's like, no matter what you do, you're just wrong. And when you don't have very firm defensive tackles against the run, this is kind of a challenge that you have, and you're supposed to be able to make up with that with some pass rush. And, well, they're not even using those guys to rush the passer. They're using Javon Solid and Dorian Williams as their interior rushers on their most important, rundown or passing downs to get some pass rush. So it's not a good situation there when it comes to that defensive tackle group in general. And, the Bills have to try to overcome it the rest of the way.
Do you feel like we're heading back towards, Joe, a place where this defense used to live, which is constant complaints and constant, really, games like that where you get run on, but maybe the pass defense is starting to return to something that you can count on more game in and game out?
Yeah, I really like the direction of the coverage. I think they're covering a lot better. They're not zone spot dropping as much. They're matching. You're getting a lot more man against Tampa. They played a lot more cover one than they typically do, which was cool to see. And that's been a lot more connected on the back end. The problem is I think your pass rush is really slumping right now. Was pretty much non-existent the last 2 weeks, to be honest. I think their pressure rate's like 20%, which is really, really low. And you just kind of look at the dynamics of it. And Joey Bosa's trying to play on one hand, and it's obvious. And you're missing Oliver, you're missing Hoyt, and I think you're really going to need scheme, and you're going to need the young players like a Javon Solomon, like a T.J. Sanders, and even a Deion Walker on passing downs to really elevate to kind of overcome, I think, what you're missing, and the fact that Bosa's he's really playing with one hand out there, and it's just not as effective. So they're going to need to figure that out. Obviously, Houston's a pretty ripe team with their offensive line issues to get something going. But, that right now this team has to overcome very inconsistent run defense and, to me, what's a very much a declining pass rush right now.
So on the back end, though, that one thing that is looking good, Joe, I feel like a football axiom is there's what you want to do and there's what you can do. Have the arrivals of Maxwell Hairston and, let's put Jordan Poyer on this list, but also Cole Bishop, have the Bills now put together a group back there that gives them the opportunity to do more of what they want to do as opposed to what they feel they're only allowed to get away with?
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it, Jeremy. I think when you have Trey White as a every down player on the outside, and of course the limitations that Taylor Rapp had playing through that injury, you couldn't do as much, right? You could just hope to stay leveraged and make tackles. And now you can be a little bit more aggressive. You can be more deliberate with some of your disguises and trust guys to cover more real estate. You've got more man coverage potential for sure, especially with Hairston and Hancock on the field. So I think there's been some really nice developments there that's opened up the menu. I think that combined with Sean McDermott's impact with the play calling, I think there's been a pretty obvious, coming out of the bye, thinking about the Falcons and just how they were, finding anywhere they wanted to put Drake London, and, he's finding space and making catches. And really since then, Carolina, Kansas City, Miami, Tampa, those 4 games where we know that Sean McDermott was involved in the play calling, I think there's been a much more connected group. Not to mention you certainly do have those reinforcements of Hairston and Hancock, but also, not having Rapp out there as well. So you got rid of some of your limitations. You've expanded your menu, and it's a lot better with their coverage.
Joe Marino of the Locked On Bills podcast here, joining us to talk about Bills Texans, also looking back on Bills Bucs a bit. Of course, the offensive side of the ball, Joe, the question is, can they just do that all the time? How different was it from a scheme standpoint, the kind of throws Allen took, or whether he was just a better, more decisive decision maker? It was, the joke around town, I feel like, is it looked like a Brian Daboll offense, right? That's what we remember them to be like, is a lot of receivers, finding space, throws down the field. How different was it that what Joe Brady and Josh Allen put on the field on Sunday?
Yeah, it's very, very different. And, we even had some conversations earlier this year where I said, it looks like the Bills try to just play offense in a very small box. And, there's just a lot of bodies in small areas, and it's hard to really get space. And I think the spacing of the offense was as good as we've seen it this past week. There was obviously some intent with pushing the ball down the field. And, let's be honest, they were 1 of 4 on deep throws. And the one completion was a scramble drill to, Tyrell, I wouldn't call it scramble. I'd call it out of structure to the throw to Tyrell Shavers. Then he misses Shakir and misses Hardman, and then there's the miscommunication on Curtis Samuel. The point being is just that threat certainly mattered a ton, where the spacing was a lot better. I think part of it is because of some intended deep throws. I think part of it's because of the involvement of the running backs in the passing game, albeit that those were schemed throws. I think it gave Tampa more to pay attention to, but I think ultimately not having Keon Coleman out there really helped, because I don't think he's got the right feel for the offense and space and scramble drill and, how to adjust and how to sit in zone and where to find that space when Josh is looking for guys to get open when things break down. I think that you really elevated that spot with Tyrell Shavers playing more, and of course with Gabe Davis playing some more, and I think that improved your spacing. So those 3 things, plus, Tampa blitzed 60% of the time. They're committing 5+ to rushing. That's going to give you a little bit more space on the back end as well, and it was nice to see the Bills finally able to take advantage of some of that.
How likely do you think it is that the receiving corps can keep giving them games like that? Shavers gave them a game. I listened to your all 22 breakdown a little bit, Joe, and there also was that play where Allen finds Cook for the touchdown, where Palmer is wide open. If he had to go to his next read, Palmer's going to score, and then we're talking about him a lot more this week. So between Palmer, Shavers, if Davis continues to get elevated here, how trustworthy, I guess, should that receiving corps be if they're the ones that are out there?
Well, I really, really like the way that it looks with Gabe Davis in the mix and Josh Palmer back and being available. Palmer's a really good route runner. It pops all over the tape, and I felt like they were about to bust out against Atlanta, and then of course he has been injured since halfway through that game, and so thinking that him getting stabilized as the route runner that can get those buckets, and then you kind of mix in some guys with some more space. I do like the potential here for where it can go. It's just can they stay healthy? Can you get Kincaid back? I think there's a lot of room for this passing game to evolve in season, which is exciting. It needed to happen, and I think that this group could certainly correct a lot of the frustrations that we've had earlier this year.
Joe Marino of the Locked On Bills podcast. All right, Joe, so the Texans, the biggest challenge they present is doing what? Anything against this defense? It's a strong defense pretty much from front to back. We heard Dan Orlovsky on the clip leading in about the safeties, but let's get to the front of the defense. Spencer Brown, Deion Dawkins, they got to be on their game this week, eh?
Yeah, it's going to be a real heavyweight fight. I think the world of the Houston edge rushers, Will Anderson and Daniil Hunter. I think that's the best pair of edge rushers in the league. And, either one of them can dominate a one-on-one matchup at any point in time. They're awesome. And then I think they got the best pair of corners in the league too, and Derek Stingley and Kamari Lassiter. So it's a big assignment, to be able to be consistent moving the football, and nobody really is against Houston. And so I think you got to look at where you can find opportunities to be effective. I look at the interior of their defensive line. Tim Settle, Mario Edwards, Sheldon Rankins. Those are good penetration style players, but I don't think they're the most firm against the run. I think you've got an advantage with your interior offensive line. I think you need to be able to create some displacement in the run game and attack them with that. The Bills' run game's been in a little slump here. I don't know that we want to talk too much about it, but the last couple of weeks, the Bills have been held under 100 rushing yards, and it just hasn't been something that they can lean on. And so, can that wake up a little bit this week against Houston? I think they'll need it. I think you're going to want to, be opportunistic in the passing game. I think you're going to have to thread the needle a little bit more this week with some efficiency. And then, can you dial up some stuff down the field? And when it's there, you got to hit it. You can't leave stuff on the table here or leave it on the field against Houston. There's going to be rare opportunities, and when they're there, you got to take them. And I think ultimately the X factor is Josh Allen, the playmaker. I remember in 2020, it didn't matter how good the defense was. The Bills played great defenses every week. It didn't matter. That guy was going to score. He was going to figure it out. And I think you're going to need some of that this week against Houston. They're a great defense, but, I think that Josh Allen's the greatest playmaking quarterback that the league has right now. And so I'm excited to see what that looks like and, see what this Bills defense can get done against, a pretty good backup quarterback in Davis Mills, but a backup quarterback nonetheless.
Is there anything that really scares you about the Houston offense other than, is Nico Collins the only answer here?
Yeah, Nico Collins for sure. I think he's a heck of a player. I think he's one of those really dynamic vertical players, really good size, speed, and he just gets loose down the field. And, the Bills are pretty good at defending the deep ball, and, I don't necessarily feel like they don't have answers in Harrison or Benford. I think either one, you can make a case that they're good matchups. Harrison's got the speed, and, Benford's a physical player that would kind of profile well against Nico Collins. And I thought Benford had one of his best games of the year, right? He's kind of had a down year. I thought he played a lot better against Tampa. So it's a good test, but that's kind of the guy, right? He's a special receiver. Everything else is, kind of shaky about that Houston offense. And so, I'm curious to see what Buffalo can do defensively. Davis Mills really struggles when he comes off of his first read. Literally metrically about as bad as you can be. But he throws to his first read the second most of any quarterback in the league so far this year, right? A backup quarterback that's coming in and running the offense. If we could see that vintage, Sean McDermott defense that takes away that first read and forces quarterbacks to work deeper in the snap, I think that's going to help a ton. But this could be like a 20-13 type game or something like that. I'm not expecting a ton of points on Thursday night.
Joe, I know you watch and talk the rest of the league as well. Have a preliminary thought on Chiefs Colts?
Yeah, it's a good football game. I'm really interested to see, honestly, what Daniel Jones has. I think he's the X factor. There's been some shakiness to him the last couple of weeks with taking sacks and turning the ball over, and they've overcome some stuff, but it's really been Jonathan Taylor, and I think the Chiefs have a pretty good run defense, and so I kind of think the Chiefs are going to win. I just don't know about Daniel Jones in that type of a moment. I don't think that that the Colts will just be able to ride Jonathan Taylor. So if the Colts win that game in a meaningful way, I think that'll tell me a lot about the Colts, but I'm a little bit concerned about some of the trajectory of Daniel Jones this season and then, what they can hang their hat on against this Chiefs defense that I think matches up pretty well with them.
Joe Marino, Locked on Bills podcast. Find everything he does at thejoemarino.com. His Herd Mentality Substack, the L22 reviews, all that good stuff. Joe, thanks. We'll talk next week, and enjoy the game.
All right, guys. Thanks so much.
Joe Marino.